2.5 years earlier, Matthew McConaughey had been sitting in this very studio across from Joy Behar when the conversation took a turn no one expected. Joy tried to frame him with a political label, painting him as anti-gun and pushing for a headline-making answer. Instead of taking the bait, he calmly looked her in the eye and ended the exchange with 7 unforgettable words. "A game I'm not interested in playing." Those words spread across social media within hours, earning millions of views and praise from people who admired his refusal to be pushed into someone else's narrative. The internet moved on, but one person never seemed to forget that moment: Joy Behar. And what happened next would prove exactly why. Now, Matthew was returning to The View at the height of one of the biggest career revivals Hollywood had seen in years. His latest film had critics celebrating his comeback, calling it a defining performance that reminded audiences why he had always been one of the industry's most respected actors. Across the table sat Joy Behar, wearing the same practiced smile she always wore before asking the question she believed would corner her guest. But this time she underestimated the man sitting in front of her. This was someone raised in Uvalde, Texas, someone who had learned to shoot a BB gun as a child on streets, forever changed by unimaginable tragedy, someone who later stood before the nation at the White House, holding the green Converse sneakers of a little girl whose life had been stolen. Those experiences had reshaped him in ways no television debate ever could. He wasn't interested in political games back then, and he certainly wasn't about to start now. Before we get to the moment that completely changed the atmosphere inside the studio, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below, because what unfolded next became the moment many viewers believe Joy Behar finally realized that some people remember every word, carry every scar, and refuse to be intimidated no matter who's asking the questions. The energy inside the View studio shifted the instant Matthew McConaughey stepped onto the stage. At 56, he carried himself with the same relaxed confidence that had defined him for decades, moving with the calm assurance of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Yet behind that familiar Texas charm was a man transformed by 6 years away from the spotlight. He had devoted himself to his family, expanded his charitable work, and focused on the Greenlights Grant Initiative, helping schools secure federal funding for mental health support and campus safety. Those years also forced him to process the heartbreak of Uvalde, including the unforgettable moment he stood at the White House holding Mate Rodriguez's green Converse sneakers, the heartbreaking symbol of a child lost far too soon. Time had taught him that some pain never disappears. It simply becomes part of who you are and how you choose to move forward. Whoopi Goldberg greeted him with a warm embrace that felt completely genuine, while Sarah Haynes couldn't hide her excitement at seeing him again. The audience rose to its feet, applauding for nearly 2 full minutes in a welcome usually reserved for icons returning after a long absence. Matthew smiled with quiet gratitude, soaking in the moment. Joy Behar smiled too, but there was something different behind her expression. Longtime viewers had seen that look before. It was the look she wore when she believed she had spotted an opening, and it often meant the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. "Matthew McConaughey, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said as the applause finally settled. "It's been far too long." Matthew leaned back with his signature easygoing grin and answered in the unmistakable drawl fans knew by heart. All right. Good seeing all of you beautiful ladies." The audience laughed, and for a brief moment the interview felt light, relaxed, and exactly as everyone expected. But that calm wouldn't last. Sarah quickly shifted the conversation toward his work. "Let's talk about The Lost Bus. Paul Greengrass directing you in such an emotional true story about the Paradise Fire. How did you prepare for something like that?" Matthew's smile softened as he reflected on the experience. He explained that he spent time with Kevin McKay, the real-life bus driver who risked everything to drive 22 children through walls of fire instead of turning back. Matthew recalled asking him what gave him the courage to keep going, and Kevin's answer stayed with him forever. He hadn't been thinking about himself. His only thought was getting those children safely back to their parents. Matthew said that, to him, was the true meaning of courage. Not living without fear, but choosing to act even when fear tells you to stop. The conversation then turned to the rivals of Amziah King, a performance earning some of the strongest reviews of his career. Critics were already calling it one of the year's finest films, and Sarah wanted to know what drew him to the role of a former foster parent who becomes a mentor to a young woman searching for justice. Matthew leaned forward thoughtfully before explaining that the story was ultimately about protecting others. He described Amziah as a flawed man carrying the weight of past mistakes, someone who discovers that redemption isn't found in words but through service, compassion, and helping the next generation become stronger than the one before. For a brief moment he stopped speaking, his eyes reflecting emotions that reached far beyond the movie itself. Then he admitted that lately he had been thinking constantly about what adults owe the young people who look up to them, about the responsibility to keep them safe in a world that often feels increasingly dangerous. The room grew noticeably quieter as everyone listened, but just as the conversation was becoming deeply personal, everything changed. Speaking of keeping young people safe, Joy Behar interrupted, her voice cutting through the silence, and the mood inside the studio instantly shifted. The last time you were here, we had quite an exchange. Do you remember that, Matthew? The tension was impossible to ignore. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances as if they already knew where this was heading. Matthew's friendly smile remained, but there was a subtle change in the way he sat, almost as though he had been expecting this question all along. I remember it, Matthew replied calmly. September of 2023. You called me anti-gun on national television and tried to place me into a category where I didn't belong. Joy immediately defended herself, insisting she had simply been asking a fair question about his political future in Texas. But what happened after that would leave the entire table speechless. You weren't looking for an honest conversation, Matthew said evenly. You were looking for a soundbite. And those are two very different things. Joy's expression immediately hardened. I was pointing out that your views on guns might not resonate in a state that strongly supports the Second Amendment. Matthew repeated her words with deliberate calm. My views on guns? He paused just long enough for the silence to settle over the studio before continuing. Joy, I grew up in Uvalde, Texas. I learned to shoot my first BB gun there. My first .410 shotgun too. I'm a gun owner, and I absolutely believe in the Second Amendment. But I also believe responsible gun ownership and heartbreaking acts of violence are not the same issue. When people pretend they are, they're either misunderstanding the conversation or intentionally blurring the truth. The atmosphere inside the studio changed instantly, and every eye at the table turned toward Joy. Her expression tightened. So you're saying I was misleading my audience? Matthew never raised his voice. I'm saying you called me anti-gun, even though I've never once argued that Americans should have their guns taken away. What I've supported is responsibility. Background checks, raising the minimum age to purchase assault-style rifles to 21, red flag laws, policies that overwhelming majorities of Americans, including many gun owners, already support. He leaned forward slightly, and the emotion in his voice became impossible to ignore. 19 children were killed in my hometown, Joy. 19 kids who'll never graduate, never fall in love, never start families of their own. 2 teachers died trying to protect them. His voice faltered for only a second before he continued. I stood at the White House holding the green Converse sneakers of 10-year-old Mate Rodriguez because they were the only thing left that could identify her. The only thing. So when that kind of tragedy gets reduced to a political headline or used to squeeze someone into a label for better television, it doesn't just miss the truth. It disrespects the memory of the people who were lost. The room fell into complete silence. Trying to regain control, Joy responded quickly. I wasn't trying to disrespect anyone. I was talking about the political reality in Texas. Matthew shook his head. No, Joy. You were trying to manufacture conflict. That's become the formula. Find the issue that divides people. Press the right buttons, and wait for the sparks to fly. But I'm not here to create fireworks. I'm here to talk about work that actually matters and efforts that have made a real difference in people's lives. For the first time since the interview began, even the audience seemed unsure what would happen next. Sensing the tension, Sarah Haynes stepped in with a gentler question. Matthew, tell us about the Greenlights Grant Initiative. You and Camila have accomplished something incredible by helping schools access federal funding. Matthew welcomed the change in direction, and his tone softened. After Uvalde, we discovered that billions of dollars set aside for school safety and mental health programs were never being used. Many superintendents in small rural districts are wearing 5 different hats every day. They're managing schools, driving buses, coaching sports, solving problems nonstop. They simply don't have the time or resources to work through stacks of complicated grant applications. So we built an initiative that helps connect those schools with funding that already exists. So far, we've helped hundreds of districts get access to support they desperately needed. Hoopy smiled warmly. That's truly meaningful work. But before the conversation could move forward, Joy interrupted again. Let me ask you this, Matthew, she said. Back in 2021, you seriously considered running for governor of Texas before deciding against it. A lot of people believed you backed away because you couldn't win as a Democrat in a deeply conservative state. Was that the real reason? Matthew's expression barely changed, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. I didn't run because I wanted to be present for my children. Levi was 13. Vita was 11. Livingston was 8. Those years don't come back once they're gone. I realized I could contribute more as a father and as an advocate than I ever could as a politician. Joy wasn't satisfied. Some people would say that's a convenient explanation. Maybe you looked at the polling and realized there was no way to satisfy both your progressive friends in Hollywood and conservative voters back home. The remark lingered in the air, and for a brief moment Matthew said nothing. Then he looked directly at her, his calm voice carrying a quiet intensity that immediately drew everyone's attention. Joy, let me ask you something. When was the last time you drove through rural Texas? When was the last time you sat beside a family in Uvalde that buried a child? When was the last time you spent time with the people you're so comfortable talking about from this table? Joy flushed. I'm a journalist. I ask questions. Matthew answered without hesitation. You're an entertainer who sometimes asks questions. There's a difference. Journalists try to understand people. You often try to provoke them. Journalists respect complexity. You tend to reduce it to the most inflammatory version because that's what creates the biggest reaction. His words landed with unmistakable force, and even the other hosts remained silent. Joy immediately pushed back. That's not fair. Matthew finally let some of the emotion show. 2.5 years ago, you had every opportunity to ask me about the families in Uvalde, the work we were doing to help them, or the legislation I was supporting to protect children. Those were the conversations that mattered. But instead, you chose the one that would create the loudest headline. And that's the difference between seeking understanding and chasing controversy. What happened after that would leave the entire panel struggling to respond. Instead, you went for the headline, Matthew said, slowly shaking his head. You tried to corner me with a loaded question because you thought it would make great television. He glanced around the table before continuing. And now, here we are again. You could be asking about the lost bus and what it meant to tell the story of everyday courage. You could ask about the rivals of Amzia King and the importance of broader representation in Hollywood. You could ask about the schools we've been able to help or the young lives that may be safer because of the work we've done. But instead, you're revisiting an argument from 2.5 years ago because I didn't give you the moment you wanted. The room grew noticeably quieter as every word landed. Joy tried to steady herself. I'm not holding on to anything. I'm doing my job. Matthew let out a short laugh, though there wasn't a trace of amusement behind it. Your job? He repeated. Let me tell you what I think about jobs. A bus driver's job is getting children home safely, and Kevin McKay fulfilled that duty by driving through flames to save 22 kids. A teacher's job is to educate and protect, and in Uvalde, Eva Morales and Irma Garcia gave everything they had trying to shield their students. His voice carried more emotion with every sentence. The way I see my job is telling stories that matter and using whatever platform I've been given to make someone's life a little better. If your idea of doing your job is taking shots at people who are out there trying to make a difference, then don't expect me to applaud it. Whoopi gently leaned forward. Matthew, maybe we should. Before she could finish, he respectfully raised a hand. With respect, Whoopi, I've waited 2.5 years to say this. He turned back toward Joy without breaking eye contact. Do you know why I pointed my finger at you the last time I was here? Because I recognized exactly what was happening. It wasn't about understanding my position. It wasn't about having an honest conversation. It was about creating a viral clip, and if that meant oversimplifying or distorting what I actually believed, so be it. Joy immediately objected. I didn't misrepresent you. Matthew answered without hesitation. You labeled me anti-gun, even though I've never argued that Americans should have their guns taken away. That's not a disagreement. That's an inaccurate description. He paused, allowing the silence to settle before speaking again. And the hardest part to understand is this. That clip reached millions of people. Everyone saw what happened. Yet somehow, nothing changed. Because today you're trying to recreate the exact same moment. Joy pushed back from the table and rose to her feet, the sound of her chair scraping across the floor, cutting through the silence. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured. Matthew remained composed. That's your choice. But before this conversation ends, I want to leave you with one thought. His voice became quieter, forcing everyone in the studio to listen even more carefully. I've stood beside families whose lives were changed forever. I've comforted parents carrying unimaginable grief. I've looked into the eyes of children who experienced things no child should ever endure. Through all of it, I've tried to build bridges instead of walls. I've tried to encourage people to come together instead of pushing them farther apart. I focused on finding solutions instead of creating more conflict. He gestured gently toward the table. That's why I came here today. I wanted to talk about hope, about ordinary people showing extraordinary courage, about redemption, service, and protecting the next generation. But somehow we've ended up right back where we started, chasing another political confrontation instead of discussing the people whose stories actually deserve to be heard. He slowly shook his head, his expression softening. That's what disappoints me the most. Somewhere along the way, it's easy to forget there are real families behind every headline, real heartbreak behind every debate, and real lives affected by the way these conversations are framed. Joy reached for her microphone and began unclipping it with noticeably unsteady hands. I'm done with this interview, she said, her voice strained. Matthew simply nodded. As Joy turned and walked away from the table without looking back, the only sound left in the studio was the echo of her footsteps, while everyone else remained seated in complete silence, absorbing the intensity of what had just unfolded. As the cameras continued recording, every second of the tense aftermath was captured. Matthew turned toward Whoopi, the intensity fading from his expression. I'm sorry things went in this direction, Whoopi. This wasn't why I came here. She looked back at him and gently shook her head. Don't apologize. Sometimes difficult conversations need to happen. Matthew took a slow breath before facing the audience and then the camera. We're living in a time where tearing people down gets more attention than lifting them up. It's become easier to attack than to understand, easier to chase arguments than to solve real problems. And honestly, I'm exhausted by it. His words carried a quiet sincerity to everyone watching who has lost someone to violence, whether it's a child, a parent, a friend, or anyone you love. I hope you know your grief should never become entertainment. The people you've lost deserve to be remembered for who they were, not reduced to headlines or political debates. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. And to everyone trying to make a positive difference, trying to bring people together instead of pushing them apart, don't lose hope. You're not doing it alone. A warm smile finally crossed his face, the familiar smile audiences had recognized for decades. There are more people building bridges than tearing them down. They may not always make the loudest noise, but they're out there every single day making a difference. He gave a small nod before ending with the words that had become part of his identity. Just keep living. That's all any of us can do. Just keep living. The audience responded with sustained applause. Not because they were prompted to, but because the moment felt deeply personal. It wasn't simply appreciation for an actor. It felt like recognition of a message that resonated far beyond the studio walls. Over the following days, clips from the interview spread rapidly across social media, with viewers passionately debating the exchange and sharing Matthew's remarks about empathy, responsibility, and finding common ground. Discussions surrounding his charitable efforts and the Greenlights Grant Initiative gained renewed attention, introducing many people to work they hadn't previously known about. As the conversation expanded online, supporters praised his focus on unity, while critics continued to debate the interview from every possible angle, turning the appearance into one of the most talked-about television moments of the week. As public discussion intensified, attention increasingly shifted toward the causes Matthew had highlighted rather than the confrontation itself. More people began learning about school safety initiatives, community advocacy, and the importance of supporting families affected by tragedy. The interview had started as a routine promotional appearance, but it evolved into something much larger. A conversation about leadership, compassion, and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. No matter which side viewers found themselves on, few could deny that the exchange had sparked an emotional national discussion. When the media spotlight eventually faded, Matthew returned home to Texas, back to his family, his foundation, and the work that mattered most to him. Away from television studios and online debates, he continued focusing on helping communities, supporting schools, and encouraging conversations centered on healing instead of division. That, more than any headline or viral clip, reflected the image this story wanted to leave behind. A man who believed that lasting change comes from action, not arguments, and that even after witnessing heartbreaking tragedy, choosing hope is still possible. Now it's your turn to weigh in. What did you think about this unforgettable exchange? Did both sides make valid points, or do you believe one side handled the conversation better than the other? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy compelling stories that spark meaningful conversations, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one.